and you could have it all. My empire of dirt.
Welcome, friends. Here we are talking the season finale of Doctor Who, the first season finale since RTD came back. The first season finale with Ncuti Gatwa, and the first season finale under this Disney Plus umbrella. This is the one entitled Empire of Death. Now, there will be spoilers ahead. If those aren't for you, take this as your last warning. Let's crack into the show. All of that build-up I just gave this episode is supposed to be warranted, since this is the culmination of not just the season, but the Christmas special, and even some of the 60th anniversary stuff as well. This should be a heavy hitter, kind of tying together all of those loose threads, solving all of the mysteries, and putting everything together from the episodes we've seen so far in this season. And unfortunately, in my opinion, I don't think it worked very well at that at all. Now, a lot of the elements in this episode, in fact, I probably would go so far as to say almost all of the elements in this episode could have worked a heck of a lot better than they were actually implemented in this episode. And I'm not entirely certain why that is the case. A lot of the things they did should have worked. They just didn't feel earned, and they didn't feel connected in a good way. So I guess the biggest thing is that shock reveal last episode of Sutekh's return. That was a pretty good build-up. I was actually mostly a fan of how they implemented that. Now, sure, I had some questions about whether or not it would track for people who had no idea who Sutekh was before, people who had no way to go back and watch the original, and just how it would work for newcomers. So that was my main question there. But the build-up and the grand reveal and just the shock and awe on the characters' faces was like, oh my god, something big is about to happen. And for whatever reason in this episode, Sutekh didn't do all that much. Now, I know you'll say he pretty much destroyed the entire universe, but I'm saying the character model and the actual Sutekh himself did little more than just sit on top of the TARDIS in that dog form and kind of talk. There was no real confrontation, and the whole dusting of the entire universe, or the vast majority of the universe, that felt very low stakes to me as well. And this is probably the first time we've really seen as many worlds kind of turning to dust and characters turning to dust. It just felt so empty to me. It felt like there was no real stakes. It never really hit me that anything substantial was going on, and it never really connected with me in the way I think it was supposed to. I'm not entirely certain why that's the case. It just kind of felt like killing time until the inevitable reset switch was going to be flipped. And I know there was never going to be lingering death on a grand scale, but maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe they just kind of kicked into that way too quickly, and there was no real build-up. It just kind of happened, and we knew, basically, I would say probably from the moment it happened to the characters in unit, that none of it was going to stick. And just to show us this ramped up scale, it was kind of overkill for something that was never going to have any lasting implications. So that left our main trio of Mel, the Doctor, and Ruby kind of skittering away in the memory TARDIS, which, to be fair, I like how this was actually sort of created by them using the time window and the whole confluence of memory and time creating a tangible physical thing. That worked for me. And like I said earlier, a heck of a lot of the ideas in this episode worked for me. They just didn't come together into anything that really excited me. Ruby and the Doctor came together to have a pretty good dynamic in this episode for the little bit of time they actually spent trying to solve the problem, which kind of adds another wrinkle into this. For the length of the season we've had, which was very short, half the episodes the characters weren't really kind of working together. One or the other was kind of the main focus. You know, the Doctor was doing everything while Ruby was unconscious, or the Doctor was just zapped out of reality while Ruby did all the heavy lifting. So there wasn't really all that much cohesive working togetherness and camaraderie and building of a relationship between these characters throughout the season for it to have any sort of substantial emotional weight during this episode when they inevitably broke up at the end. Well, they didn't really break up. I guess that was a poor choice of words, but life changed in certain circumstances, so their traveling together isn't necessarily going to go forward the way it has for this season, but it doesn't feel like they really spent all that much time together to begin with. I don't think we've really had that many moments of Doctor and companion shenanigans that really could be looked back on. This is the definitive moment between Ruby and the Doctor. Maybe you have to go all the way back to the Christmas special, and then ever since then it's been a bit hit or miss. Now, the big Sutekh reveal could have been interesting and could have been intriguing, and it was also tied into the reveal of who Susan Triad actually is, and I think it was actually a pretty big mistake to claim that Sutekh had been clinging to the TARDIS all the way back from the Fourth Doctor's era. Now, that is potentially leading to some future storylines we don't know yet, but something I've reiterated a few times across this first season of my videos here, you can't retroactively make an episode better with a grand reveal. Sure, the rewatchability can be increased, the understanding of the episode can be increased, but you can't create a good episode out of a bad episode by having to watch a later episode, if that makes sense. It just doesn't really work that way. At least in my opinion, maybe that differs from other people. So by doing this big reveal here, you are now adding Sutekh into this grand history of the show, so much so that I've already seen some really great memes out there, but the one that really kind of strikes me is I'm picturing the Spider-Man meme of all the Spider-Men pointing at each other, because in the 50th anniversary, there was a minimum of, I have to say, 8 versions of Sutekh all in the same place at the same time, assuming that the 4th Doctor in the 50th anniversary was from before he encountered Sutekh. That would leave us the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th Doctors, plus the War Doctor. So I guess actually you're dealing with 9 versions of Sutekh all in the same place at once, maybe 10. That just seems improbable and canon breaking, and I know Doctor Who has always had a loose canon, so I'm not saying that really destroys the show in any sort of retroactive sense. It just adds all of this funny nuance to all of the shows and the episodes and the storylines and the things that have happened in the past where, you know, every time the TARDIS is destroyed, oh, Sutekh was there. Anytime the TARDIS was taken over by another malevolent force, anytime the TARDIS became sentient and talked to the Doctor, anytime the TARDIS visited a parallel dimension or another universe or encountered a version of itself, there was always a couple of Suteks. Heck, going back to the 60th anniversary when the Doctor split the TARDIS with a mallet, did he also split Sutekh at that point? I have to imagine, since that was an RTD created thing, he probably had to think about that, so maybe Sutekh isn't gone, it was just this version of him, and maybe Sutekh is splintered into various pieces out there. I don't exactly know how that works. I think personally, the way for this to make any sort of logical sense without kind of contradicting things we've seen before would have been to show us or to tell us, or however they were going to go about it, that Sutekh was able to reach into our reality and grab hold of the TARDIS in Wild Blue Yonder at the edge of creation after the invocation of the salt and the mystical and the supernatural and all that stuff. That allowed him to kind of crawl his way back into our reality from the void where he had been existing. That would also help more accurately explain Susan Triad, because the very first appearance of her character, Susan Twist being an actress in the show, was that episode in Newton. So you could also say that during this encounter, that character was latched onto and drug across space and time, being used as a template and recreated in all of these places the TARDIS landed. Now, the way it kind of looks is, why did Susan Triad start to populate around the universe at this time? It doesn't necessarily make sense, because they were saying that anytime the TARDIS landed anywhere, a version of Susan Triad was created in that place, and she was mostly populated on Earth because of just how many times the TARDIS has landed on Earth over its history. That's why she kept gaining power and power and power. So I think it would have made a heck of a lot more sense to tie this all back to that one moment. Now, we also had the big reveal in this episode, and they spent more time on this, I think, than Sutekh, which maybe made the season a bit more of a letdown, because the Ruby's mother thing was the one big thing that was actually seeded throughout the season. And I don't hate the reveal that Ruby's mother is just kind of a regular person, that she was kind of grown into this legendary status, this myth, because of the feeling and the emotion and the uncertainty and the memory and the thought process of Ruby. She was important because she was important to Ruby, not because she was this grand pan-dimensional godlike being or anything. I do not hate that reveal at all. In fact, it makes more sense that they were going to do that than to try and create this huge character that gave birth to Ruby. how that still kind of ties into the fact that Ruby was manifesting these powers throughout the season. I don't know if that was still adequately explained. Why were all of these gods kind of scared of Ruby's inner song and her snow and all of that stuff? Where did that come from? Is that all just a manifestation of Ruby's emotional state and the power of uncertainty in her memory creating these things? And if that's the case, how many other beings out there, humans and just regular people, can manifest these insane powers just because they have some sort of unresolved memory or thought process going on? I don't know if that really 100% tracks. I kind of feel like they wanted to sow the seeds of this grand mystery so much, and they wanted it to kind of be a big nothing of a reveal, that by doing so, it kind of undermines and renders the mystery incompatible with the reveal at the end of the season. I could be wrong, and this is a wacky sci-fi show, so I'm sure one line of pseudo-techno-babble could explain it away. It just didn't quite feel earned to me, but I did really feel like that emotional resolution between Ruby getting to meet her mother, all of that worked on a level of emotionality, not so much on a level of good storytelling. Kind of similar to how I felt with the ending of Discovery. It didn't feel like an earned ending for Star Trek Discovery. It felt like an emotional ending for Michael Burnham's character and Michael Burnham's family only. Kind of felt like a similar thing here. We weren't given adequate closure to the grand scale of the sci-fi story of Doctor Who. We were given emotional closure to the storyline of Ruby Sunday's mother. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just didn't strike me as being an adequate season finale with all of this lead up. Especially, it kind of felt like they just threw the Sutekh thing away and just hurried it out of there so they could get to Ruby's mother's reveal. Couple other things that felt like Rose was wasted in both of these episodes. Why did she even need to be there? I don't mind the unit characters being sort of underutilized. That's kind of their purpose, but it felt more like, hey, we need to bring her back in, and just gave her nothing to do. Similar, a little bit less though, Mel didn't have all that much to do in this episode, and it would have been nice to have her utilized more fully in the story, and I would have liked them to spend a bit more time with that kind of in the middle of the episode where the Doctor travels to this distant planet, encounters the woman who had lost her memory and her baby, and get the spoon. I kind of liked that conceptually. The idea of that was pretty cool, but it was just kind of an out of nowhere 5-minute scene. If they had kind of pared back some of the other stuff and spent more time wandering and traveling in this reduced to almost nothing reality that's left out there, the ruins and the almost death of everything, that could have been more interesting to see them try to navigate this landscape and cobble together some way to bring everything back into existence. Would have been nicer than just to kind of cut to a scene where the Doctor walks into a tent, talks to somebody who is clearly a misdirect for us to think that might be Ruby's mother because she has a baby, and then to inevitably just immediately cut right back to the solving of the problem. I would have liked maybe 10, maybe 15 minutes of exploring this desolate wasteland. Maybe, again, that's just a personal opinion. So at the end of the day, a lot of these ideas could have worked, but their execution just completely fell flat for me, and it kind of tanks my opinion of the season a little bit. So I thought it started off pretty weak and just built and built and built. The middle of the season was excessively strong, but the end fell a little bit flat again. And I think the biggest problem I have with this season is it doesn't really feel all that coherent. It kind of feels like several episodes that are not really connected to each other, just thrown together. And that may have to do with the nature of just less episodes and the nature of the filming needing to keep the Doctor kind of Doctor light for a few episodes while he finished commitments to other things. I'm not entirely certain, but it feels more like this was just a collection of a few random episodes than an actual coherent season. Oh, I forgot to talk about Mrs. Flood. They were very much pushing in last episode and this episode the idea that Mrs. Flood is Clara. I have to imagine it's not going to be because they were pushing it so hard, giving her the exact costume that Clara wore a couple of times and giving her the clever boy thing. That has to be a misdirect. So maybe she's some grander thing, like she's this goddess of storytelling or something, so she just is able to take on elements of people that have existed in Doctor Who because she's the one telling the story. Again, I don't know, maybe that'll be explored in the Christmas special, but leave all your thoughts down below. Like, share, subscribe, do all those fancy YouTube things, and until next time,
I will